Show is from Henry Ford Jackson Hospital. Sleep specialist, Dr. Omar Kahn. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Are you well rested?
Feeling good today, yeah.
Is a lot of pressure on you as a sleep specialist to be well rested and get the right number of hours of sleep and set a good example for your patients?
I think so, yeah. And so it can definitely take home some of the things learned about at work. So, and I think everybody can always improve on their sleep. So.
Yeah, and I think with daylight savings time coming up this weekend, we have to spring ahead. That could disrupt people's body clocks. We have body clocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we all have our internal or circadian clock that kind of tells us when to be awake and also kind of tells us when we need to be sleepy. Much of this is determined by the sun. But then there's the external clock and what time it actually is that you have to go to work and go home and so forth. And so this weekend, like you said, we're going to spring ahead, and on Sunday night you'll have to move your clock ahead 1 hour, and so you'll lose an hour of sleep potentially that night. And so yeah, I mean it's they've looked at this, and there's been some studies even showing that in the kind of days following daylight savings time, and once again, right now we're in standard time, and then after Sunday we'll be in daylight savings time. There's an increased risk of hospitalizations due to something called atrial fibrillation. There's more admissions for strokes. There's more car accidents in the first few days after the time change. So we really start to see the actual effects of losing sleep during these time periods.
Well, let's talk about daylight savings time, because I think it was about a year ago there was discussion in Congress, and I think even one chamber passed a law to eliminate daylight savings time and just have one time year round. What do you think?
Yeah, so I guess there was, I think, recently a bill introduced called the Sunshine Protection Act. It's actually to make daylight savings time permanent, which, personally, I think if we go to some sort of fixed time, whether it's permanent standard time or permanent daylight savings time, it would probably be better than the current system of changing twice a year. I think there's pretty broad support to go to just go to a fixed time. And so hopefully, they can get something through, but, although some people prefer the extra hour in the afternoon, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine actually advocates for permanent standard time because it's more closely aligned with the internal clock.
Awesome, and that's what I am recommending, that we stay with this permanent standard time all year round. And you can actually do it yourself and just ignore everyone else's time, right?
Yeah.
Because, we get the same 24 hours a day, every day. How we manage our time probably has more control over how we feel than how the government manages our time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Changing the clocks doesn't change the amount of sun that you're exposed to, but unfortunately, going to work and being on a fixed schedule and things, if you work from home, maybe not as much, but for many people, it's you sort of have to adjust.
Well, let's talk. We'll talk about sleep, but let's talk about daylight savings time just for another moment. So we're going to lose an hour of sleep, which we were talking before the show. This is the worst of the two because we're losing an hour. So for those people that don't get enough sleep to begin with, going into this weekend, losing another hour of sleep, is there anything that we can do to make the adjustment easier on our bodies?
Yeah, so people who are already sleep deprived are probably more at risk to feel the effects of losing an extra hour. So just kind of having that awareness, like for the first few days after this time change, you might be feeling more tired. And even losing an hour of sleep one night, let's say you get back on track the next, the following day, it can still take a few days to kind of recover even from one night of losing some sleep. So,
Really?
so what are, your question was, what are some things we can do to mitigate that? So one of the things, you can sort of work on at home is actually adjusting your sleep schedule prior to daylight savings time, but more gradually. So, for example, try to change your sleep schedule by 20 minutes every day for 3 days leading into the time change. And so that, changing by an hour can be difficult to do. It can be hard to fall asleep an hour earlier, but maybe 20 minutes would be easier. And so, for example, like let's say your bedtime's 10 p.m., you'd go to bed at 9:40 for a night, and then 9:20, and then 9, and then when the time change comes, you're kind of back at 10 p.m. So it's after the time change, it really feels like you're going to bed an hour earlier, and that's a more difficult adjustment than staying up later and going to sleep.
So there are people that think if they sleep longer for a couple nights, that time, that sleep, you could bank it and count it toward the next day when you don't get enough sleep. Is that true?
Yeah, so there is like this, I wouldn't say there's firm research out there to support, doing something like that. I think it's more important, like we talked about at the beginning, to actually change our internal clock to match the external clock. And so, it's more about the ability to fall asleep when you want to, rather than trying to sleep an extra, couple hours to, that might make you feel, it's definitely important to feel more rested going into a time change because, like I said, there's an increased risk of car accidents and things like that. But it's probably a better strategy to actually change your sleep schedule rather than focus on the number of hours.
How many hours is recommended for a good night's sleep?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a different answer to that depending on your age. But in adults, for example, the recommended amount of sleep is 7 to 9 hours. In children, it's more. So in teenagers, it's more like 8 to 10. In younger kids, it's like 9 to 11 hours of sleep. But in adults, at least 7 hours of sleep is recommended. Now, if you don't get 7 hours of sleep, that's been linked to heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, and other poor outcomes, health outcomes.
How many hours do you sleep a night?
I get about 7. Yeah. A little more on the weekend.
So everyone has different, we've all got people that say, I only need 4 hours of sleep every night. There's other people that sleep 10 hours. Do people have different body clocks where somebody can get away with sleeping 4 hours, or are they doing themselves harm that they don't even realize?
Yeah, I think that's still kind of something that, we're looking at, as a scientific community, but there is there are short sleepers that sleep less than the recommended amount of time, and they feel rested, and then there are long sleepers that sleep more than 9 hours that also, and that's just what they need to feel rested. But those are more of the exceptions to the rule.
And Dr. Kahn was without power at his home for 6 days. So do you have some sleep to catch up on?
Yeah, well, there wasn't much to do with the power out, so definitely caught up on some sleep.
So sleep can be challenging for some people. I don't have any problem going to sleep. But there are other people, they toss and turn. They could take an hour or 2 hours to go to sleep every night. And I think that's like wasted time. You're not able to do anything constructive. You're not actually getting sleep. You're just tossing and turning for an hour or two. Are there some things that people can do to make the routine of going to bed more relaxing, so that when their head hits the pillow, it's night-night?
Yeah, so, it's every once in a while, if you have a hard time falling asleep, you just want to make sure you get back on track. But if you're having a more significant problem. And I guess to answer the question, like what is a healthy sleep routine? That would be always keeping the same bedtime and wake time. So yes, and during the time change, we have to sort of adapt and adjust that a little bit. But you always want to try to go to bed at, let's say 10 p.m. and get up at 5 a.m. So for people who work nights, that might be different. But so keeping a consistent sleep schedule. Now on nights when you are having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, the more time you spend in your bed awake, the more your brain starts to think of your bed as a place where you don't feel tired. So we typically recommend people, get in their beds when they feel sleepy, because one of the worst things you can do for your sleep is to just spend a lot of time in your bed awake, because when you do get in bed, like maybe the next day, you're not thinking of your bed as a place where you feel tired. So you want to establish that strong connection. So if you ever wake up, can't go back to bed in like 20 minutes, best thing to do is get up, go to your living room, try to read something until you feel tired again, and then get back in bed.
How about TV in the bedroom?
Yeah, so, like I said, doing anything in your bedroom that's not sleeping, like watching TV or looking at your phone, things like that could potentially make your sleep worse. And with TV, it's not so much about the noise or the activity of doing it. It's the light. So the light from your TV, the light from your phone, computer, this can stimulate your brain to want to be awake, just like it is when you're out in the sun. So we typically recommend people turn all that stuff off about an hour before bed. But if you're gonna, look at or watch TV, it's best to do it in your living room and not your bedroom.
Yeah, a lot of people, they'll pick up the phone, they're there just to set the alarm, and then suddenly, they start scrolling, and then they're down that rabbit hole where they're sucked into it. Same with the computer or the smartphone, not in bed.
Yeah. So, some strategies, like some people set alarms to say, hey, okay, not an alarm to wake up, but an alarm to go to bed.
Oh, wow.
And so, okay, this alarm went off, I'm going to put everything down and then, focus on sleep.
Snooze button, fan or not?
You just don't want to, use it too often. Like I said, it's important to keep that consistent sleep schedule.
What does your alarm thing look like on your phone? Because mine, these are all my alarms. I've got a few of them because every day it's different.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's snooze. There's built-in snooze.
So you do the best you can, and you got to find out what works for yourself as an individual, and that might be different, depending, like comparing with somebody else. So you got to sort of figure out what works.
And I know I asked you this the last time you were here about dreams, and while Dr. Kahn's not a dream analyst, I'm concerned that on nights where I dream a lot, or I'll wake up and I'll have done a million things in my dreams. I've traveled, I've done, I've eaten, it's amazing how much time passes when you're dreaming, how much stuff can happen in your dreams. Isn't your brain working? Is your body and your brain, are you actually getting rested when you're doing such heavy duty dreaming?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So REM sleep, or dream sleep, is one of the deeper stages of sleep, and actually one of the stages of sleep that helps you feel rested. But you're right. Parts of the brain that are we see parts of the brain active during REM sleep that are also active during wake, and so. While we don't really know exactly what the significance of dreaming is, we're still, I don't know if we'll ever have the answer to that question, but, we do know that it's a very important stage of sleep, and you want about 25% of your sleep to be dream sleep.
Really? So dreams are good. They contribute to your restfulness.
Yes.
It seems counter to what, it seems like it takes up a lot of energy. And some people, they wake up all thrashing and sweating.
Yeah, so anything like that would be concerning for like an underlying sleep disorder, and you'd want to, kind of seek the guidance of a sleep specialist.
Like you.
Yeah.
What about naps during the day? Is that a good idea? Like if you really don't have enough time to get those 7 to 9 hours in at night, can you get an hour in the afternoon that counts toward that?
Yeah, so napping, we typically don't recommend it because it can make it harder to sleep later on at night in some people. And it shouldn't be mistaken for a replacement of 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night because, getting 5 hours of sleep at night, 2 hours during the day isn't the same as getting 7 hours at night. You don't get into that deep sleep, or your sleep is more broken up when you do it that way. But for some people, napping can be a useful tool if it's short. So you typically want to keep your naps like 20 minutes or less.
Oh my gosh.
Because you run the risk of a nap that's longer than that entering deep sleep, and then if you wake up from deep sleep, you could feel more tired than when you started the nap. It could make it harder to fall asleep at night when you actually need to be sleeping. But it can help you feel more rested. A short nap, if it's earlier in the day, it can give you more energy for like a couple hours after if you need to do it.
And you tend to snap at people when you wake up from a nap.
Yeah, I mean,
in our house, they're snapping. All right, so food. There are people that say, "Oh, you shouldn't eat after X o'clock because it impacts your sleep." So there's, I guess, a couple issues. Eating in bed. There's another thing, like watching TV in bed, eating in bed. It's not where you should be doing it, right?
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's been some questions asked about what foods are good for sleep, what foods aren't good for sleep. Once again, something that it's hard to draw firm conclusions about any of the studies that have been done there. They've looked at things like, high, or diets that are high in sugar and carbohydrates could have a negative impact on sleep, whereas things like high fiber and fruits and vegetables could, positively affect sleep. Although, like I said, it's hard to draw any firm conclusions there. But you brought up some good points about timing. You don't want to go to bed like really hungry, but you also don't want to go to bed having just eaten a large meal. Like when you're sleeping, your digestive system slows down. You're more likely to have problems with acid reflux if you eat right before bed. So typically you'd want to, not have a large meal within 2 hours before bedtime. If you're going to eat something, it should be like a light snack that is like protein based.
All right, so there are people that will have like a routine, a drink or a food before they go to sleep. Warm glass of milk, tea, hot chocolate, 4 fingers of scotch, maybe. Something that they've become used to as a habit that they have. Maybe it's psychological, maybe it is not. That having something like that, are there foods, drinks, or anything that do contribute to getting a better night's sleep?
Well, certainly you'd want to. So we don't know like what's necessarily good for you. We know some things that are not good for you. Okay. So chocolate, for example, many people don't think about it, but chocolate can contain caffeine, and so that could make it potentially harder to fall asleep. So you'd probably want to avoid things like that. Alcohol, while that could make you tired, it has been shown to have negative impacts on the quality of your sleep. So typically, we don't recommend drinking right before bedtime just because it can have some negative effects on the type of sleep that you're getting. So it's probably best to avoid things like that rather than focus on doing something else.
What about sleeping pills?
Yeah, there are medications that are used for sleep, whether it's over-the-counter or prescription. Those don't tend to be very good long-term solutions to help people sleep. Much of sleep is just, we develop these behaviors that can make, our sleep well, it can cause us to have good sleep or bad sleep. And so just figuring out, what we're doing and making adjustments tends to work better in the long term than medications.
And then there are people that they wake up and they can't get back to sleep. That's awful.
Yeah.
And the longer you're awake, the worse it is.
Yeah, so with that, like I said earlier, the best thing you can do is get up and get out of bed and go to your living room and try to read something.
Awesome. Now, for you, if you have a night that you can't get to sleep, do you have a secret? Do you have a place you go? Do you count something like sheep?
Yeah, I typically try to read something that's somewhat boring. You don't want to read anything you can't put down. You don't want to pick up a really interesting book that has you're trying to get to the end of it. You want to read something kind of somewhat like a magazine or something like that. Not something you're too interested in. So I'll look at something, like science-based, and then, get back in bed when I feel tired.
It's a good idea, because the heavy book, it'll wake you up when it falls to the floor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, want to look out for that.
So if anybody has issues, and really sleep, it's got to be one of the things everyone's, at some point or another has an issue with. You're welcoming their calls.
Yeah, so so I work at the Henry Ford Jackson Sleep Clinic. We can be reached at 517-205-4750, or you can request an appointment through your primary doctor's office.
Do you do like sleep studies where someone comes in and you watch them while they sleep and with electrodes and everything?
Yeah, so sleep studies are usually done at night unless somebody is like a shift worker and sleeps during the day. There are sleep technologists that administer the sleep study, and then typically we look at it like the next day.
All right, so we have right here in Jackson, sleep specialists at the sleep clinic. Is that what it's called?
The sleep clinic, yeah.
Sleep clinic. Well, we appreciate all these great tips in advance of the return to daylight savings time. Thanks for coming in today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
From Henry Ford Jackson Hospital, sleep specialist, Dr. Omar Kahn.